It's finally the return of the top 5 list here on the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, and I can't think of a better way to kick off the month of October, spooky season, horror season, whatever you prefer to call it, with top 5 horror movie moments as voted by you, the listeners. And if you've never watched or listened to a top 5 episode of this podcast, the formula is really simple. In the week leading up to when the episode drops, I put out a post, usually on Facebook, saying, hey, for this month's top 5, we're going to be talking about top 5, in this case, horror movie moments. Leave your list in the comments and I'll read them on the show. I try to do these shows once a month. I know recently the show's been really busy with, having constant guest bookings, which is not a bad problem to have, but people have been asking about the top 5 list, and this is it. Top 5 horror movie moments. My number 5 is Johnny Depp's iconic death scene from A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I didn't really start watching horror films until around this time in 2018. Started with the Halloween movies, the original 3, watched the Scream films, and then got into A Nightmare on Elm Street because I've always been fascinated with the Freddy Krueger character. Even though I didn't grow up watching horror films, that character always fascinated me in the sense that he would attack you when you're supposed to be in your safest space, when you're asleep, when you're resting. So if you've seen the film, you know the scene I'm talking about, and it turns out that it was Johnny Depp. And I didn't know that when I first watched it because I didn't really read anything about it because I wanted to go in knowing as little as possible and having an open mind about the entire film. So sure enough, I find out that is Johnny Depp. One, I think that's a really cool thing, seeing kind of, where he came from. And it's one of the coolest death scenes in the movie. So it had to make my top 5, so it comes in at number 5. Number 4, one of the most iconic movie scenes of all time, the chest bursting scene from Alien when it bursts out of Kane's chest. Alien is, one of the greatest horror films and one of the greatest sci-fi movies, in my opinion. Like Aliens gets a ton of credit, as it should. It is a better movie, but we wouldn't have gotten Aliens without Alien. So again, like the Johnny Depp scene, it's what stands out to me from that original Alien movie. Number 3, Jack Nicholson breaking down the bathroom door in The Shining. You all know what scene I'm talking about, where you see his head, through the doorway, and he says, "Here's Johnny." I have seen that part of the film numerous times, but didn't watch the thing from start to finish until a few years ago for the first time. And it's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I love Jack Nicholson's performance. It's one of my favorite that he's ever done. And it's, again, an iconic movie scene. Number 2, the ending of the original Halloween film. After Dr. Loomis shoots Michael Myers and he falls off the balcony, and he looks down and sees that he's gone, and then you see the shots of the different houses throughout the neighborhood, and you just hear the from behind Michael Myers' mask. So cool, and there's so many great moments in that movie. It's probably my favorite horror movie of all time. We'll say second to what's going to be my number 1 on this list. But it's such a great, great movie, and it's the moment that stands out to me out of numerous moments from that film. But my number 1 is the opening scene in Scream 1. The phone call with Drew Barrymore, and she ends up getting killed at the end of it. It's been parodied and mentioned a lot, but the way the whole thing plays out from start to finish, and that kind of meta-ness that we've seen throughout the entire franchise, Scream really reinvented the horror genre, in my opinion. And I'm sure, leading up from the 70s up to that point, a lot of the horror movies kind of follow a specific formula. Well, Scream kind of turned that upside down and is, to me, one of the most clever movies ever made. And there's some cool moments in that. besides, the opening, like I think the reveal of who the killer or killers are is really cool. But I had to put the opening from the movie as my number one. Scream is my favorite horror franchise, again, because of, I like the characters and I like the whole meta-ness of that entire series. So, and it's still going on to this day. I've enjoyed the most recent installments, and we'll see what happens with the rest of that franchise. So no honorable mentions for me. This was a pretty easy list to make, so I was able to narrow it down pretty well. So we'll go ahead and move into the listeners list. And again, thank you to everyone for sending your list. Really humbled by the responses. Be sure to just follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at D Diamond Podcast, and just be on the lookout for when we'll do the next top 5 list. First up, we have Steve Wise, former guest here on the podcast. In no particular order, the toy clown attacks Robbie in Poltergeist. That's a good one. The baby xenomorph erupts from Kane's chest in Alien. Mentioned that, in my list as well. The severed head grows spider legs in The Thing. That's a really good one too. I haven't watched The Thing in a while, so I know with it now being October, my wife and I are going to watch a ton of horror movies, so definitely need to add this to the rewatch list. Carrie White lets loose on prom night in the original Carrie. I have to confess, I have not seen Carrie yet. It is on my list, so I will get to that by the end of the month. The boy vampire scratches on the window outside Mark's bedroom in Tobe Hooper's Salem's Lot. Next up, we have AJ Caruso, who's also a former guest on the podcast. Brilliant film composer as well. This is so hard. Here is my initial stab. No pun intended there. Number 5, the shark leaps on the boat and swallows Quint. I'm glad that Jaws was put in there too, because, yeah, it's more recognized as a summer blockbuster in my opinion, but it's a horror movie. And it caused a lot of people to not get in the ocean after this movie came out. So I'm glad to see that entry. Number 4, the original Dawn of the Dead. Roger emerges from under the sheet as a zombie, and Peter is forced to kill his partner. Number 3, Alien, the chest burster scene. Mentioned that earlier. Number 2, The Exorcist. Linda Blair sitting up and spinning her head completely around. That's another one of those, not just a great horror movie moment, but a great movie moment. It's one of those that transcends its genre. Number 1, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when Leatherface kills his first victim and drags him into the back and slams the door shut. What a great name for a villain, Leatherface. It almost inspires fear when you say it. Like, it sounds like a great horror movie villain name. Wade Vatican, a frequent, contributor to the top 5 list. Honorable mentions from Creepshow 2, The Raft Story. Not 2, but his second honorable mention, Pet Sematary, any scenes involving Rachel's dead sister Zelda. Number 5, Freddy Krueger kills Tina in The Nightmare on Elm Street. I was debating putting that as an honorable mention. With my list, what I try to do is just pick one entry per franchise or series to have a little bit more diversity, but I can understand why that is on his list. Number 4, sci-fi / horror, but the alien popping out of the stomach in Alien. That's been a frequent, entry as far as these lists go, and I don't think it's going to be the last time you hear it. Number 3, the shower scene from Psycho. Arguably the most iconic scene in movie history. Number 2, Mrs. Voorhees revealed as the killer in Friday the 13th. Is still a great trivia question because people associate Jason Voorhees with that franchise, and rightfully so. But, Jason's mom was the killer in the original film. Spoilers if you haven't seen it. Number 1, Chrissy, victim number 1 in Jaws. Joey Image, another former guest, and also a frequent contributor to the Nerd Cave Retro podcast, the other show I'm on. His honorable mention, Horace Pinker in Shocker, just in general. Love that movie and character. I still need to watch that. I'll add that to the list for the month of October as well. In no particular order, the Billy and Stu reveal in original Scream, they were, of course, revealed as the killer or killers. Such a great twist, and one of my favorite twists in that genre. 2, Michael Myers disappears after 6 gunshots at the end of the original Halloween. I put that on my list as well. Number 3, the Psycho shower scene. Arguably the most iconic movie scene in history. Number 4, Pinocchio shoves a little girl in front of a school bus in Pinocchio's Revenge. And he's mentioned this, movie to myself and our mutual friends Jason and Wally. I do want to do a watch along with them, because that sounds like such a fun movie to watch. And number 5, the first time the viewer sees a girl's lips sewn shut together in Strangeland. I saw this on a lot of lists in doing some research and kind of jogging my memory as far as what to put as potential entries. Brad Blanchard, actually had a great phone conversation with Brad a couple of days ago. Number 1, the kids from Children of the Corn. 2, when that blue Chevy truck pulls up on the 2 guys in the car, then Leatherface goes to work in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Number 3, the creepy song the troll sang in the movie Troll. Number 4, Chop Top heating up the coat hanger and picking the meat off of his head in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And number 5, being a 7-year-old kid and reading the opening scroll of Return of the Living Dead. Then my brother's telling me they kept the zombie bodies on NAS. For those that aren't from the Pensacola area, NAS is a naval air station that is here in town. One of the biggest and most known Navy bases in the country. That would freak me out if I had siblings and they told me that. From Jason Robbins, my co-host over at the Nerd Cave Retro podcast. These really aren't in any order because there are way too many horror movies that I love with awesome moments. Connell Cochran tells Dr. Chalice his plans and the meaning of Samhain. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. That's from Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which he and I are both staunch defenders of. When recommendations for horror movies, I can remember he said to watch Halloween 3 first because famously it doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the series. I think it's a great movie and it should get more credit than it should. Pretty much all of In the Mouth of Madness, especially the end when Sam Neill's character is in the movie theater at the end watching his entire story up on the screen, and starts laughing hysterically. Laurie Strode thinks it's over, but behind her, Michael Myers sits bolt upright. No, it's not over. I wonder if, because, The Undertaker and Kane used to do that in WWE. I wonder if that's where they got that from. I'm betting that it is. I should have looked that up before we started, because it's probably the case, and then I'm going to feel stupid. In The Thing, when the guy's head rips off, grows eye stalks and legs, scuttles across the floor, and generally just grosses and freaks me out at the same time. That was mentioned, in Steve's list earlier. When Jumbo the Killer Clown kills Officer Mooney and turns him into a literal hand puppet. Killer Clowns from Outer Space is a fun movie. Honorable mentions, after Ash cuts his own hand off and replaces it with a chainsaw, and of course he says the iconic line, groovy. I think we're going to need a bigger boat, which of course is from Jaws. And game over, man. Game over. Mike Eveland, one of the co-owners of B-Res Coffee Company and fellow horror fanatic, from Event Horizon, Visions of Hell via the videotape, some of the freakiest stuff I have ever seen. Very well done. From Evil Dead, I'll Swallow Your Soul, Come Get Some. From Evil Dead Army of Darkness, horror comedy, but I'm counting it. There are so many subgenres that as long as, if you want to have horror comedy or horror sci-fi, I think it qualifies because it's technically in the horror genre. Bruce Campbell gets the words wrong. I feel like Army of Darkness doesn't get as much credit. Evil Dead 2 is a better movie in my opinion, but Army of Darkness is still a lot of fun in its own right. Tina's death from Nightmare on Elm Street, that was mentioned earlier. The spaghetti scene from Alien. And an honorable mention, the opening phone call scene from Scream. He says it's a trope now, but at the time, this was iconic. Nick Smith, another former guest of the podcast. I know, super nice guy, great film producer. Have learned a lot working with him, Steve, and Kevin Almodovar through various films made here on the Gulf Coast. Number 5, Susie finds Helena Marko sleeping in Suspiria, then the witch wakes up. Number 4, a zombie kid playing with scissors in Night of the Living Dead. 3, the hospital corridor scene in The Exorcist 3. 2, Jason rears his ugly head at the end of Friday the 13th. And number 1, a clown knocks a guy's block off in Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Lauren Strickland, I believe these are in no particular order. The reveal in House of Wax, Vincent Price. Sydney finds out who killed her mom in Scream 3. They're Here from Poltergeist. Johnny Depp's bed scene from Nightmare on Elm Street. I mentioned that in my list. And of course, from Alien birth out of a chest cavity. From Jeremy Branch, also a former guest of the podcast and a huge horror movie buff. This is so hard. Been thinking on it, and I want to go a little outside the box with my picks. The scenes legitimately caused a visceral reaction from me. And what was great about what Jeremy did, and you can go to the original post on my Facebook, he put YouTube links for all of his entries, which were great because a lot of these movies I haven't seen yet, so it really gave me some context as to what he was talking about. Number 5, the lawnmower scene in Sinister. Number 4, something in that bag in Audition. 3, the car accident in Hereditary. 2, Lake Mungo cell phone footage. With that, he didn't put the clip in because he said he didn't want to spoil it, which I appreciate because I haven't seen that movie yet. And number 1, the opening call in Scream. And of course, he mentions in the post as well about how iconic that scene is. And he did throw in an honorable mention, which he didn't put the title in it, but I'm going to actually pull it up right now. And I should have had this at the ready, but of course I didn't. So we're going to just pull this up. And that's what's great about these top 5s is they're unedited. The Release the Monster scene from Cabin in the Woods. I'm sorry about that, Jeremy. I should have had that at the ready. Next up, we have Carlos Longoria. We've got 2 more. Carlos Longoria, or as we call him on Nerd Cave Retro, I Am the Rampage. I didn't get to watch much horror growing up, so here's a few in no particular order. From Alien, when you see the movement of the xenomorph in the shop with Ripley, the demon appears behind Josh in Insidious, and I'm glad he threw this next one in there from 7, when Sloth takes a breath. That freaked me out the first time I saw that movie. Also a very underrated movie. I really liked 7 a lot. When The Thing merged with the face of that guy from The Thing, the tall man appears from It Follows. I really enjoyed the idea of this movie because you could never tell if it was the monster or just some person walking. And he throws in 2 honorable mentions. The Fly from 1986, when she tears his jaw off and his true form is revealed. And Us, in the beginning when the doppelganger girl grabs the original girl. And last but not least, Brandon Rutledge, also a frequent contributor of the top 5 list. He has been on one of the Defending Bad Movie panels that we recorded at Pensacon. Let's see, his honorable mentions: Jason's mom is the actual killer from the original Friday the 13th. The various twists in the first Scream film, too many to pick from, I can't blame you there. John Krasinski's character sacrifices himself to save his kids in A Quiet Place. Megan chases the camp bully, who is named Brandon, from Megan. I've seen parts of Megan, but I haven't watched it from start to finish yet. I need to change that. Jelly Side Down from Devil. F.U. Lucky Charms from Leprechaun Origins. And Bub the Zombie salutes while the antagonist, Captain Rhodes, is being eaten alive from Day of the Dead. Moving into his top 5, Jason and Freddy's Final Fight from Freddy vs. Jason. Such a fun fight scene. I like that movie in the sense that, is it the greatest horror movie ever made? No, but it is fun. And that's really what I was looking for from that movie. I haven't watched it in a couple of years, but I remember it being a lot of fun. Helicopter scalps zombie from the original Dawn of the Dead. Incredible special effects for the 70s. The youngest son is killed in the first 10 minutes of A Quiet Place. Breaks my heart every time I see it. Number 2, the chest bursting scene from Alien. Absolutely iconic. And number 1, the dead body is alive and is the real Jigsaw from the original Saw movie. One of the best plot twists in the history of all films. That's going to do it for the top 5 list. Thank you to everyone who submitted your list. One of the most popular ones, and it was cool that the listeners and you guys really showed out for this list. The vote was overwhelming for this list, and I think I might do that from here on out.